In the realm of geopolitics, the potential for Saudi Arabia, a nation synonymous with wealth and strategic influence, to conquer Yemen and challenge global superpowers stands as a captivating enigma. Positioned at the heart of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia possesses formidable resources and a military presence that commands attention. However, Yemen's tumultuous landscape, rife with internal conflict and external interference, presents a complex and multifaceted challenge. The ambition to extend Saudi influence into Yemen sparks debates over the intricate interplay of politics, alliances, and regional dynamics. As the stakes rise and the sands of power shift, the audacious question persists. Could Saudi Arabia navigate this treacherous terrain, conquer Yemen, and assert itself against the mightiest of nations, reshaping the geopolitical landscape in the process? The long-standing geopolitical dynamics between Saudi Arabia and Yemen trace back centuries, shaped by cultural, religious, and strategic factors. Yemen, situated at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, has historically been a pivotal region for trade routes and territorial control. Its rich history includes ancient civilizations, such as the Sabaeans and Himyarites, who established powerful kingdoms and trade networks. In modern times, Yemen's strategic significance intensified with the discovery of oil reserves in both Saudi Arabia and Yemen, fueling competition for regional dominance. The establishment of the modern Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932 under King Abdulaziz Al Saud further solidified Saudi influence in the Arabian Peninsula. The reunification of Yemen in 1990 under President Ali Abdullah Saleh marked a significant moment in the region's history, although internal divisions and power struggles persisted. The Arab Spring uprisings in 2011 further destabilized Yemen, leading to the ousting of President Saleh and triggering a complex civil war. The conflicts erupted in 2014 when the Houthi Shia Muslim rebel movement capitalized on President Abdrabbuh Mansur Hadi's weakening authority and seized control of northern Saada province and adjacent areas. Subsequently, the Houthis seized the capital, Sana'a, forcing President Hadi into exile. Hadi grappled with a myriad of challenges, including militant attacks, systemic corruption, food insecurity, and wavering loyalty from military officers, many of whom remained aligned with the previous president, Ali Abdullah Saleh. In March 2015, Saudi Arabia, along with 8 other predominantly Sunni Arab states and backed by Western powers such as the US, UK, and France, commenced airstrikes against the Houthis. The stated objective was to reinstate President Hadi's government, as Saudi Arabia feared that Houthi success would provide their regional adversary, Iran, with a strategic foothold in Yemen. The intervention of regional powers in Yemen's conflict, including Iran and Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia, also drew the country into a regional proxy struggle along the broader Sunni-Shia divide. In June 2015, Saudi Arabia implemented a naval blockade to prevent Iran from supplying the Houthis. In response, Iran dispatched a naval convoy, raising the risk of military escalation between the two countries. The militarization of Yemen's waters also drew the attention of the U.S. Navy, which has continued to seize Yemen-bound Iranian weapons. The blockade has been at the center of the humanitarian crisis throughout the conflict. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have also led an unrelenting air campaign, with their coalition carrying out over 25,000 airstrikes. These strikes have caused over 19,000 civilian casualties, and from 2021 to 2022, the Houthis responded with a spate of drone attacks on Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The conflict's landscape is characterized by intricate internal dynamics and shifting alliances. The Houthis severed ties with Saleh, culminating in his death at the hands of Houthi fighters. Conversely, on the anti-Houthi front, there exist separatist militias advocating for the independence of southern Yemen, further complicating the conflict's resolution. The ongoing conflict has precipitated an unyielding humanitarian catastrophe, with staggering figures highlighting the plight of Yemen's populace. Millions are at risk of starvation, while the overwhelming majority of the population depends on humanitarian aid for survival. Widespread malnutrition, particularly affecting young children, underscores the dire state of Yemen's health system, which has buckled under the strain of the conflict. Additionally, outbreaks of cholera and other diseases have claimed thousands of lives, exacerbating an already dire situation. In 2023, Saudi Arabia proposed a peace plan aimed at brokering a UN-supervised ceasefire between Yemen's Saudi-backed government and the Houthi rebels, who receive support from Iran. This proposal represents a potential avenue for de-escalating the conflict and addressing the humanitarian crisis that has engulfed Yemen for years. However, the path to peace remains fraught with challenges, as entrenched grievances, competing interests, and external interventions continue to shape the trajectory of the conflict. Fighting between Houthi rebels and the Saudi coalition that backs Yemen's internationally recognized government has largely subsided, but Houthis have repeatedly attacked ships transiting the Red Sea in response to Israel's war on Hamas. Dialogue between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia, along with Iranian-Saudi normalization, has provided hope for a negotiated solution. However, talks have yielded little progress and have been punctuated by violence. The Southern Transitional Council, or STC, has also renewed calls for an independent southern Yemeni state, complicating peace prospects, and Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP attacks have surged. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis has not improved. 21.6 million people need aid, including 11 million children, and more than 4.5 million are displaced. On the battleground, the Houthis made fast progress at the start of the war, moving eastward to Marib and pushing south to Aden in early 2015. However, a Saudi intervention pushed the Houthis back north and west until the front line stabilized. A UN effort to broker peace talks between allied Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized Yemeni government stalled in the summer of 2016. In the south and east of the country, a growing Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, threatened the government's control, though its influence has since waned. In July 2016, the Houthis and the government of former President Saleh, ousted in 2011 after nearly 30 years in power, announced the formation of a political council to govern Sana'a and much of northern Yemen. However, in December 2017, Saleh broke with the Houthis and called for his followers to take up arms against them. Saleh was killed and his forces were defeated within 2 days. Meanwhile, Hadi and the internationally recognized governments face their own challenge. The Southern Transitional Council, STC. Established in 2017, the STC grew out of the Southern separatist movement that predates the Civil War and controls areas in the southwest around and including Aden. A 2019 Saudi-brokered deal incorporated the STC into the internationally recognized governments, but the faction could still present challenges. In 2018, coalition forces launched a significant offensive along the coast towards the strategically vital city of Hodeidah, Yemen's main northern seaport. The fighting culminated in a ceasefire agreement and commitments to withdraw troops from the city, which for the most part held. However, clashes persisted in other areas, notably in Taiz, Yemen's third largest city, which had been under Houthi blockade since 2015. In 2020, the United Arab Emirates officially withdrew from Yemen, though its influence in the country remained considerable. Recent developments have seen top U.S. officials urging Riyadh to agree to a ceasefire and engage in UN-sponsored negotiations. Furthermore, the Pentagon announced a cessation of in-air refueling for Saudi bombing operations. Concurrently, Congress, under the new Democratic majority, has threatened to suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia, a move already undertaken by countries like Germany. This shift marks a departure from the unconditional support extended by the Trump administration to the Saudis, sparking optimism that the conflict might finally see a negotiated resolution. However, while hopes are high for successful UN talks led by British mediator Martin Griffiths, realism must temper optimism. Despite potential willingness from Saudi and Emirati counterparts to compromise, the Iran-backed Houthis, entrenched in control across much of Yemen, are unlikely to reciprocate. Having weathered years of economic isolation and relentless Saudi airstrikes, the Houthis perceive the balance of pressure to have shifted in their favor. Moreover, their Iranian backers likely see little incentive for compromise, given the previous U.S. administration's adversarial stance towards Tehran. Should the Houthis reject diplomatic overtures, it could justify the Saudis and Emiratis to resume military operations, potentially including a bloody assault on the port of Hodeidah. Such a scenario, according to UN officials, would significantly exacerbate the already dire humanitarian situation in Yemen, all while failing to compel the Houthis into concessions. The Saudis claim they will have no choice but to escalate the war if they cannot reach an agreement at the talks. But here's a better alternative: declare victory and go home. Given all they have invested after 3.5 years of war, and their legitimate concerns about Iranian influence and Houthi threats, that might seem irrational, and it would certainly be a bitter pill to swallow. But it would be far better than continuing with a war that has had incalculable humanitarian, financial, strategic, and reputational costs for the Saudis, but has not remotely advanced their own declared objectives. In February 2021, Houthi rebels launched an offensive to seize Marib, the last stronghold of Yemen's internationally recognized government, And in early March, Houthi rebels conducted missile airstrikes in Saudi Arabia, including targeting oil tankers and facilities in international airports. The Saudi-led coalition responded to the increase in attacks with airstrikes targeting Sana'a. The offensive was the deadliest clash since 2018, killing hundreds of fighters and complicating peace processes. An economic crisis continues to compound the ongoing humanitarian crisis. In late 2019, the conflict led to the splintering of the economy into two broad economic zones under territories controlled by the Houthis and the Saudi-backed government. In the fall of 2021, the sharp depreciation of Yemen's currency, particularly in government-controlled areas, significantly reduced people's purchasing power and pushed many basic necessities even further out of reach, leading to widespread protests across cities in southern Yemen. Security forces forcefully responded to the protests. In the midst of Yemen's ongoing civil war, the United States has maintained a significant presence, primarily conducting counterterrorism operations targeting groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, ACAP, and militants affiliated with the self-proclaimed Islamic State. This involvement traces back to collaborative efforts with the Yemeni government following the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000. Over the years, the United States has conducted nearly 400 strikes in Yemen, relying mainly on airstrikes to combat terrorist threats. In April 2016, the United States expanded its involvement by deploying a small team of forces to advise and assist Saudi-led troops in retaking territory from ACAP. This collaboration marked an escalation of U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition's efforts in Yemen. However, the complexity of the conflict was underscored in January 2017 when a U.S. Special Operations Forces raid in central Yemen resulted in casualties, including one U.S. service member and several suspected AQAP-affiliated fighters, as well as an unknown number of Yemeni civilians. Against this backdrop, President Joe Biden announced a significant shift in U.S. policy towards Yemen in February 2021. He declared an end to U.S. support for Saudi-led offensive operations in the country and revoked the designation of the Houthis as a terrorist organization, signaling a departure from previous approaches. However, the situation took a different turn in January 2024 when the Houthis were once again redesignated as a terrorist organization following their attacks on ships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. This move underscores the fluid and evolving nature of the conflict, as well as the ongoing challenges in addressing terrorism and instability in Yemen. Amidst these developments, Yemen's political landscape also witnessed significant changes. In April 2022, Yemen's internationally recognized but unpopular president, Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi, resigned after a decade in power. His resignation paved the way for the formation of a new 7-member presidential council aimed at representing Yemen's diverse political factions. Chaired by Rashad al-Alimi, a Hadi advisor with close ties to Saudi Arabia and influential Yemeni politicians, the new council represents a potential shift in the country's governance structure amidst the backdrop of ongoing conflict and external interventions. Saudi Arabia's calculus in engaging with the Houthis reflects multiple factors and changing priorities. Most importantly, it is the result of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's realization that the war in Yemen has failed. From the outset of the conflict, the Crown Prince has pushed for the continuation of the conflict, and its outcome is now associated with his own personal image in the country. As the war continued, the Crown Prince reportedly came to realize that the more aggressive and adventurous foreign policy of his early years had brought the country more pain than gain. The Houthis, for their part, have won a narrow victory in the war. The group has emerged as the dominant political and military power in the country. They therefore have no intention of making serious concessions to Saudi Arabia or to the Saudi-backed internationally recognized government, now dispersed between Aden, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi. What the Houthis want is international recognition and legitimation of their power, and the institutionalization of their domination of Sana'a in northwest Yemen. Any truce represents for them not a step towards lasting peace, but an opportunity to catch their breath after years of fighting and consolidate gains. The Houthis may also be preparing for new offensives to expand the territory under their control. It is highly likely that the Houthis will launch new offensives in the not-too-distant future to seize the strategically located and hydrocarbon-rich central city of Marib, the disputed city of Taiz south of Sana'a, and portions of the west coast. As Saudi Arabia steadily withdraws from Yemen, its already limited ability to counter these attacks will further diminish. The recent negotiations between Saudi Arabia and the Houthi rebels in Yemen have ignited a glimmer of hope for an end to the protracted conflict that has inflicted immense suffering on the region. Yet, beneath the surface of this optimism lies a nuanced reality. shaped by shifting geopolitical dynamics and strategic recalibrations. At the heart of these negotiations is a fundamental shift in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy, orchestrated by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, aimed at stabilizing regional relations and extricating the kingdom from the quagmire of war. Bin Salman's strategic recalibration is evident in his efforts to mend fences with regional adversaries, most notably Iran and Qatar. This rapprochement signals a departure from the confrontational approach of the past, recognizing that foreign entanglements only serve to exacerbate the vulnerabilities of the kingdom, particularly in the face of Houthi aggression fueled by Iranian support. Consequently, the negotiations with the Houthis are not solely about achieving peace in Yemen, but rather about securing a withdrawal from a costly and damaging war, while also mitigating the threat posed by cross-border incursions and missile attacks. While the prospect of negotiations offers a glimmer of hope for peace, it is essential to recognize the underlying motivations driving Saudi Arabia's engagement with the Houthis. Bin Salman's vision of economic and social reform hinges on the stability of the region, free from the specter of conflict and external threats. Thus, the negotiations represent a pragmatic attempt to navigate the complexities of the Yemeni conflict, prioritizing the kingdom's national interests while seeking to alleviate the humanitarian crisis plaguing the region. In this context, the negotiations serve as a pivotal moment in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy trajectory, reflecting a broader shift towards diplomacy and conflict resolution. However, it is imperative to approach these negotiations with cautious optimism, recognizing the multifaceted challenges and entrenched interests at play. Achieving sustainable peace in Yemen will require genuine commitment from all parties involved, transcending geopolitical rivalries and ideological divides. As Saudi Arabia navigates the delicate terrain of negotiations with the Houthis, it must remain steadfast in its pursuit of a comprehensive and inclusive peace agreement. This necessitates fostering trust, building consensus, and addressing the root causes of the conflict, including grievances and inequalities that have fueled the Houthi insurgency. Moreover, the kingdom must leverage its diplomatic influence to garner international support for the peace process, ensuring that the aspirations of the Yemeni people for peace and stability are realized. The current negotiations reflect a shift in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy calculus, driven in part by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's recognition of the war's failure and its detrimental effects on the kingdom's image and stability. As a result, Saudi Arabia is now seeking to minimize the costs of its withdrawal from the conflict and mitigate the threat posed by Houthi cross-border attacks. For the Houthis, who have emerged as the dominant political and military force in Yemen, the negotiations present an opportunity to consolidate their power and seek international recognition. However, their objectives extend beyond achieving lasting peace. They aim to institutionalize their control over Yemen and expand their territory, potentially leading to further conflict and instability. Iran's role in the negotiations remains ambiguous, but its alignment with the Houthis' interests is clear. Iran sees an opportunity to entrench its foothold in Yemen and pressure Saudi Arabia, its regional rival. While Iran may temporarily reduce support for the Houthis to facilitate negotiations, its long-term strategic goals remain unchanged. The path to peace in Yemen is fraught with challenges, including the violent and repressive nature of Houthi rule, the weakness and fragmentation of the internationally recognized government, and the growing tensions between rival factions, such as the Southern Transitional Council. Central to Saudi Arabia's strategy is countering Iranian influence in Yemen, which it views as a threat to regional stability and security. By supporting the Yemeni government and opposing Houthi rebels aligned with Iran, Saudi Arabia aims to safeguard its interests and prevent Tehran from expanding its foothold in the Arabian Peninsula. In the absence of a comprehensive dialogue process that includes all sectors of Yemeni society, any agreement reached between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis is unlikely to achieve lasting peace. Instead, it may institutionalize Houthi power, exacerbate Yemen's fragmentation, and perpetuate the humanitarian crisis in the region. Ultimately, the resolution of the Yemeni conflict requires a concerted effort from all stakeholders, including Saudi Arabia, the Houthis, Iran, and Yemeni civil society, to address the root causes of the conflict and forge a path toward reconciliation and stability. International support and cooperation are essential for achieving peace in Yemen, with Saudi Arabia engaging with key allies and partners to garner support for its diplomatic initiatives and mobilize resources for humanitarian assistance. However, divergent interests and priorities among international actors have complicated efforts to forge a unified approach to the Yemeni crisis. further underscoring the challenges of resolving the conflict. Therefore, Saudi Arabia should be encouraged to pursue diplomatic solutions and engage in dialogue with all stakeholders. It must also balance international expectations with domestic imperatives. The kingdom must demonstrate a genuine commitment to resolving the Yemeni crisis through dialogue, compromise, and confidence-building measures while safeguarding its strategic interests and national security. Ultimately, achieving peace in Yemen requires sustained international support and engagement to address the root causes of the conflict and pave the way for a sustainable and inclusive resolution.